All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. I'm sorry for we had a few technical issues, but we're all good right now. My name is Simran. I'm with Canopy. Canopy is a co-working space based in San Francisco. I'll put the link to our website in the chat box so you can check it out. Today we have got two doctors, Dr. Renna of Lifespan Medicine and Dr. Mark Allen of Elevian, who have both dedicated their lives to understanding what is at the cutting edge of human longevity. And a massive thank you for Kim Kolt of For Good Ventures, who helped bring this together and who will also be moderating. So go ahead, Kim, it's all you. A quick thing, we will open this up to Q&A at the end, so feel free to pop your questions in the chat box, or you can digitally raise your hand, and I will pass the questions on to Kim and the speakers. Okay, Kim, all you now.
Thank you, Simran. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have Dr. Renna and Dr. Mark Allen join us and share about human longevity and their experience at what technologies are currently at the cutting edge and what is coming soon. Dr. Renna, he's originally from New York, a graduate of the University of Texas and UNT Health Science Center School of Medicine. He established a practice focused on preventing disease by achieving and maintaining optimal health and function. He has spoken on the subjects of health, wellness, and aging nationally and internationally for 30 years, published 2 books, and held board positions for Orthogon AG, Heal, and Get Help. Lifespan has offices in Dallas and Los Angeles, and a planned new location in New York City in 2021. We also have Dr. Mark Allen joining us. Dr. Mark Allen is a medical doctor turned serial tech entrepreneur. In the year 2000, he left an emergency medicine residency to found Corticon, which was AI software to guide doctors to make better patient care decisions. And this is way before AI was cool. After a successful exit there, he became passionate about the emerging longevity industry around the opportunity to therapeutically target aging. Along with 3 Harvard professors, he co-founded Elevian, who are developing the potential to change the fate of humanity. Elevian is a biopharmaceutical company developing drugs to target aging. So thank you so much. We're gonna jump right into the questions now. And if there's anything I missed, feel free to talk a little bit more about yourselves and your background, but I'm gonna just jump right into the first question. Dr. Renna, what is it that you're seeing right now?
With regard to aging. Thanks everybody for spending some time listening to this. What Dr. Allen and I would like to do is multiply whatever time you invest today into hours, days, weeks, or months in the future. What we're talking about when we talk about mitigating the aging process is overcoming a vastly complex progression that is unrelenting in its nature. We're really talking about defying both biology and time. As we age, we lose function, and that's the problem. The accumulation of the loss of function results in the diseases with which we're all familiar. And of course, the risk of developing those diseases gets greater every year, every decade, as does the risk of leaving life and dying. Anti-aging, or taking any action against that, can either mean the delay of the onset of those diseases, which would require slowing the unrelenting progressive process of loss, or a higher ambition of restoring functionality. Clearly, if you could extend health span, either by pushing diseases into the next century for each person, or by eliminating those diseases in terms of maintaining functionality, you would prolong life. The targets that we have isolated in the past have mostly been the immune system and the nervous system, comprised of the brain and the peripheral nervous system. The reason that we target those systems is because they are the regulatory hierarchy. We are the end product of this civil service that we call our immune system and our brain. Our brain has a dual role, of course. The autonomic nervous system is in constant communication with the immune system and our microbiome, and the brain at least makes an attempt to define meaning and identity, all of which have an influence on the physicality of the person. So the goals of what we're trying to do and what we've accomplished is to find ways to reduce inflammation. Inflammation is the immune system's universal response to any imbalance or abnormality in the body, and to encourage repair. Most of the time we encourage repair through either targeted proteins, sequencing of proteins, or increasing cellular energy. We're a complex system and we seek entropy over time, and if you can improve our core energy, then you can slow the entropic forces. The methods that I don't want to overlook include diet, exercise, sleep, and perspective, if you define perspective as your view of self and place in the world. That makes up the foundation of what supports your somatic being, your body. And as long as your body is comfortable, your mind and your self-concept is free to roam and range through your thoughts, ideas, and aspirations. So diet, exercise, and sleep, those behaviors are extremely important. And no matter what drugs or methodologies or techniques that we develop now or in the near future, they're not going to be able to make up for an inflammatory diet, a sedentary lifestyle, or insufficient or non-restorative sleep. Perspective rounds out the foundation of our body, because what we think of ourselves and our place in the world, whether the world is a challenge or an opportunity, is communicated through our autonomic nervous system to the immune system and sets levels of aggression. The more aggressive your immune system, the more inflammation, the faster you accumulate loss, the earlier you die. So what we're striving for is to individualize your diet, which can be done now, to reduce inflammation and support a healthy microbiome. Make sure that you get adequate exercise. We'll have better abilities to customize your exercise programs, like who should be a ballerina and who should do bench presses, as we learn more about the genome. But right now we're in the rudimentary phase of doing that. So we're counting steps, doing some weight or resistance exercise, and encouraging activity throughout the day. Sleep is, of course, of paramount importance. And we all know that 8 hours is the target. It's actually 7 hours and 20 minutes as a minimum, but some of us, and there are variances, of course, so some of us need 8.5 hours. Perspective is a whole other meeting. We can have a canopy meeting about the search of meaning and, man's meaning in the world, but we can't take that up today and still cover all the ground. Medical monitoring is a big deal. Medical monitoring is being responsible for having your teeth cleaned, having your blood tested periodically, having someone look at your skin to make sure you haven't developed a melanoma that you either can't see or don't notice. Having other types of tests, as you reach certain age barriers or age milestones rather, colonoscopies and that kind of stuff. So medical monitoring is just being responsible for yourself. There are tools that we can use to mitigate the process of aging, and they fit mostly into two categories. Once the behavioral categories are attended. Those categories are biochemical tools, and they make up off-label use of medications as well as peptides and supplements. Peptides, by the way, are small protein molecules that have been studied and elucidated with regard to their actions that lie between pharmaceuticals, because they're not taken up by drug companies and popularized or gotten approval by FDA. At the same time, they're not nutritional supplements. You can't buy them at vitamin shop. Peptides come through compounding pharmacies and are, at least now, a small but somewhat robustly active menu of agents. The other things in biochemistry include the off-label use of medications, and the headliners are metformin, rapamycin, and dasatinib. Metformin is a drug that's indicated for type 2 diabetes. There was a study done in the early 2000s that showed that diabetics who took metformin had fewer chronic diseases than non-diabetics, which of course got a lot of attention. And since then, there's been a great deal of investigation and illumination with regard to how metformin slows the aging process. Metformin is not an age reverser, it's a slower. There's a signaling process, which I would encourage you to think of as, let's say, a river and its tributaries that flows throughout the cell called mTOR. And it was noticed that this drug called rapamycin, which was initially developed to treat cancers, positively affected the mTOR systems and helped to restore some levels of function in otherwise dysfunctional cells, not just the cancerous cells, of course, but healthy cells. So rapamycin has gotten a lot of attention and is still something that we should focus on. There's a category of drugs and supplements, for that matter, called senolytics. Senolytics are focused on the elimination of senescent cells. The usual process in our body is that our cells age and accumulate damage, and at some point they trigger a self-suicide mechanism called apoptosis and remove themselves from the community before they start to leak and stain and damage the neighboring cells. Unfortunately, not all cells reach apoptosis, so we build up greater and greater numbers of senescent cells over time, resulting in the poisoning of the neighboring cells in the cell community. Senolytics are drugs or supplements that eliminate those cells. The marquee right now is a drug called dasatinib, which is another cancer chemotherapy drug, and the nutritional supplement quercetin, spelled Quercitin. Looks more like quercetin, but it's pronounced like COR. The third senolytic that has been studied and basically proved is a simple bioflavonoid called fisetin. If you're not familiar with the biochemical term, bioflavonoids are headed by vitamin C. That's the family to which vitamin C belongs. Quercetin is also a bioflavonoid. So we have biochemical tools in the form of metformin, rapamycin, dasatinib. There are simple tools that have been used for a long time. Baby aspirin taken daily has a positive effect on aging. Those people have been given prescription drugs to block the ACE receptors, which are now, more in the public knowledge because of COVID, binding to ACE receptors. Those drugs have been shown to slow the aging process. Beta blockers, which are drugs that block the beta receptor, interfering with adrenaline's activities. As we get older, we get more disorganized, our immune system gets a little more aggressive, and we get a little more nervous. And that excess aggression in the immune system's part and the excess nervousness causes us to oversecrete adrenaline and damage ourselves by accelerating metabolism. Those drugs can be helpful. The PDE5 inhibitors, which are the male sexual function drugs, have some benefits in terms of slowing the aging process. There are a host of nutritional supplements, nicotinamide riboside, nicotinamide mononucleotide, which are NR and NMR, NMN, are nutritional supplements that have been popularized by venture capitalists and funds that have backed companies that sell them on the internet. Nicotinamide riboside is enhanced either by trans resveratrol, which was a kind of a big hit substance or nutritional supplement in the early 2000s, and something called pterostilbene. There are other supplements, cat's claw extract of some kind, different variations of NAD, which is an accessory energy compound in the cells. All of those things have a proved effect on slowing the aging process, with the senolytics and rapamycin having a little bit more profound effect on actually restoring function, which would be in the category of reversing aging. No drug and no supplement comes without potential adverse effects. And of course, the more effective the drug, the higher the risk. So of those that I mentioned, metformin is almost a wholly safe medication, whereas rapamycin and dasatinib can cause adverse effects that no one would want. And to the best of our ability, we try and avoid those when we put them into use, but no one can eliminate that risk entirely. Last year, there was a paper published by a researcher named Greg Fahey who demonstrated the reversal of aging by 1 year in 9 men who took a combination of metformin, the adrenal hormone DHEA, and human growth hormone. Fahey's hypothesis was that if you got growth factors high enough and kept insulin low enough, I'll be happy to explain why, but that's not important to the story. If you do that, if you raise the growth factors and lower the insulin level, you can stimulate the immune system to be healthier and to do a better job, in a sense. And the better the job the immune system does, the more aging you reverse. We also have tools, those are the biochemical tools that I thought you might be interested in hearing about. We also have other tools. We have the human genome and understanding the genome and our gene variations and what the unique needs and demands are made by those variations. We have stem cells, and we have a rudimentary understanding, a very early understanding of the microbiome, which seems to be inseparable from the intestinal mucosa, the immune system that underlies that mucosa, and reaches through those layers, through the intestinal mucosa into the immune system and actually affects gene expression. Those three systems are early innovations. We're really just partially aware of their significance. In your lifetime, we're going to develop faster chips and better processors and transistors, and we're going to be able to understand these vastly complex systems of human genome variations, microbiome, and stem cell activities. And we're going to build on these early tools that we have now. If you have your genome mapped, we clinicians are going to understand maybe 400 of the genes that they'll look at, and they're going to map 20 to 25,000 genes. If you have stem cells extracted from your own body in seeking to put them back in, or if you use umbilical cord stem cells outside the United States, they're not legal in the United States. But if you have those stem cells, it's really going to be kind of a hit and miss at this point, meaning stem cells are not ready for prime time either. But we're learning that a safer, less expensive, and more effective way of using stem cells is to use them as a manufacturing facility for some substance or the microparticles called exosomes. And in the future, I believe that when we have a better understanding of the healing sequence, we'll be able to target exosomes from your stem cells or from a younger person and help you heal to the point of restoring function. And remember that restoring function is the goal of reversing aging. We're also going to use that new computing power, or that forthcoming computing power, to understand the microbiome and its complex relationships with the body. And in terms of testing, what we do at Lifespan is use conventional medical tools and tests to customize individual programs and explain those individual programs, and then help apply those through an elite service model. One of the things that, three things that I wanted to pass along to you in summary is, number one, don't overlook the basics. The basics are diet, exercise, sleep, and your worldview. If you haven't found meaning yet, if you haven't identified yourself yet, spend some time doing that. If you want to extend your life into the next century, into the next third century, there's got to be a reason for you to want to do that. As we all know, it takes a lot of work to be here, and it's not always fun. So you got to have that meaning. The second thing I wanted to point out, first was don't forget the basics. The second thing is you're going to need support. It's great if you want to take metformin, or if you want to find a doctor who will give you rapamycin or dasatinib and quercetin. But those devices are pushing back against the tide of aging, which is unrelenting. So you're going to need a relationship with that person who's administering that. You have to find someone who understands your body, your being, your existence from the ground up. It's not a, it's not a flash mob. It's not a pop-up store that you go in and you have an IV of NAD, or you go in and you have a prescription written for rapamycin, and then you're going to be younger. Rapamycin, dasatinib, quercetin, metformin, all the supplements that I mentioned are going to have to be taken on a regular and recurring basis because aging doesn't sleep, doesn't rest. The third thing is testing, and I'll leave it at that. I'll just say that, we're going to need more computational power to really make use of the things that we want to test, like the genome, the microbiome, the brain, and the immune system and how those interact. I appreciate you guys listening.
Thank you.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Quick question. What are your thoughts on using berberine?
So berberine, the activities of berberine, which is a nutritional supplement, are similar to the actions of metformin in some ways. Metformin is a more complete anti-aging drug than berberine, but if you find difficulty in taking medications, if you don't want to take a prescription drug, or if you take metformin and for some reason you don't seem to tolerate it, then berberine would be a next good substitute.
Great, thank you. Chris, that was both very enlightening and wise. I really appreciate you going through all that. And if as a listener you are tuning in, it's easy to see why his knowledge is considered highly regarded by a whole host of everything from professional athletes to politicians. And one thing I have gotten to know Dr. Renna over the course of the last several years, and he's very humble. But if you want to run into some pretty amazing people, just go to his offices and see one of his doctors that work from everything from the brain to regenerative medicine for sports injuries, etc. So I'm looking forward to hearing even more from you. Thank you. And Mark, moving on to you, what is the future? What are some of the things that you're working on? I understand there are a number of technologies revolutionizing human health, including yours. Could you tell us about what you're most excited for and why?
Sure, absolutely. I want to start with just reinforcing something that Chris said, which is that there are just a few very simple interventions that are available to all of us that can literally change your lifespan and your health span, the years in which you're healthy, by more than a decade in each direction. So these are available, and we've known them from human wisdom perspective for a long time, but the data is absolutely clear today, right? If you exercise, if you eat well, if you don't smoke, right? You can, at the age of 50, the data suggests that you can add more than a decade of healthy life, right? And you see a lot of people, you see these people today, 50 is the new 30. I just turned 50, right? I've never felt better in my life. It's not very hard. I hope everybody is practicing this. So the point is that aging is subject to intervention in both directions. So we can accelerate the rate we age by doing the wrong things. We can slow, or in some cases even reverse, the rate at which we age by doing the right things. And what we're trying to do, and what some other companies in the space are trying to do, is we're trying to figure out exactly what's happening from a biological perspective. As Chris says, biochemical, the molecules that are happening inside of our bodies. And we're trying to package that into pills or injectables. So the most potent aspects of aging. So really a lot of this comes to the study of aging itself. So what's happening in that aging process? When we're young, our bodies are incredible at healing themselves. We have this incredible regenerative capacity. So we can break bones and heal very quickly, or skeletal muscle injuries. But, everything that we don't see inside of our bodies are healing itself on the molecular level and cellular level. And for some reason that we don't understand clearly, that deteriorates as we age. And as that deteriorates, we start to accumulate more and more damage. It starts to really pop above the surface as symptoms, and we start to label it disease. But that process of accumulating damage is happening over many years. And that's what aging is. So when I went to medical school, they taught us about all these different diseases, and they taught us that drugs target mechanisms specific to individual diseases. And that's great. We've made a lot of progress with Western medicine. But the problem is that aging attacks, everything. So suppose that we had the perfect drug to cure heart disease. So eradicate it from the planet, the #1 cause of death in this world. So a statistical analysis suggests that that would increase the average lifespan by only 2 to 3 years. But even worse, it would double the rate of Alzheimer's disease and many, many other age-related diseases because our bodies will still age. So instead, if we focus on, let's target the aging process. And there's a variety of different ways to do this. We target that aging process, we have the potential to treat and prevent multiple different age-related diseases at the same time. And prevent is really the ultimate goal, to promote healthy aging. So I got really, really excited by this. After my last exit, I had the opportunity to really step back and think about what I wanted to do next in my life. And I started reading about this research where scientists were taking model species and radically extending their lifespan. So in worms today, they can extend the lifespan of worms by 10 times. But in mice, it's about 2 times. So that's radical. Imagine that in humans, if we could translate that, right? So a lot of that work is now being translated by companies like Elevian, like my company, into drugs. So I'll tell you a little bit about what ours is. So I spent just about a year just studying this space after I sold my last company, and going to conferences, meeting the researchers and entrepreneurs in this space and investors interested in this space, and looked at a couple dozen different really exciting projects. There's a lot out there that's really exciting. It's a great time to be alive. This particular project came out of research that started at Stanford and then went on to Harvard. And so I have 3 co-founders in the company that are all Harvard professors, and several other co-founders, Harvard PhD, several drug development veterans in the company. So what my Harvard professor co-founders discovered is that circulating factors regulate aging in both directions. So there are circulating factors that we produce as aged organisms that seem to accelerate the rate at which we age. And there are circulating factors that we produce as young organisms that slow or reverse the rate of aging. And these original studies were published way back in the early 2000s. And there's stuff like young blood can rejuvenate old people. There may be some truth to that, but that's probably not a scalable therapeutic. And what my co-founders did is they studied, what is it in the blood? What are these factors, these proteins that are represented in our DNA, that are expressed at different levels as we age, and how do they change with age? And out of that work, they discovered a little known protein. The protein was known, but it circulates in such low concentrations that nobody had ever been able to measure it before. This protein called GDF11 stands for growth differentiation factor 11. So they discovered that it decreases with age by many measures. And they discovered that if you replenish GDF11 to youthful levels, you're able to turn on a number of regenerative pathways, and you're able to restore function in the brain, in the heart, in the skeletal muscle, and now we know in many, many other tissues. So this is incredibly exciting. So one protein, that when we replenish this protein to youthful levels, it's able to effectively treat and prevent, let me say, in animals, right? That's all of our work so far, a number of different age-related diseases. So out of this discovery, so I partnered up with them, had some great investors, Bold Capital, which is Peter Diamandis, a phenomenal futurist, and just did a round with Prime Movers Lab, Tony Robbins, another great world changer. So, great investors joining forces with us to help us to create drugs from this discovery. So our first drug that we're working on is simply replenishing this natural protein. So it's actually a recombinantly produced version of this protein, growth differentiation factor 11, GDF11. And so the issue is that there is no regulatory path for aging. So we need to figure out what disease do we target first. And what's interesting is we look at, although our ultimate goal is to promote healthy aging and to prevent diseases, from a regulatory perspective, to get it through clinical trials, you actually take the opposite approach. You look at what is the most devastating possible disease that has no good treatment, where people are going to die or be disabled, and where we can see effects very, very quickly. And so we've tested our drug in a variety of different models of disease. And what we've discovered is that in stroke, that just a few days of treatment of GDF11 can significantly promote recovery after a stroke. Now, stroke is an incredibly devastating disease. It's the #2 cause of death worldwide. 1 in 6 people will get a stroke, and it's the #1 cause of long-term disability. The only treatment is limited to the first few hours after stroke, specifically to eliminate clots. But if you miss that window, there is no treatment. And less than 10% of patients in the US get that treatment, and half of them that do have ongoing deficits. So the majority of patients could really benefit from something. There is nothing else. So the idea here is that we would treat patients about a day after they've had a stroke, and hopefully we see the same sorts of changes that we see in animal models, which is improved recovery and improved survival after a stroke. And once we get to market with that, doctors like Chris Renna will immediately start using it off-label. So for you guys to know, all the drugs that he mentioned, require prescription, and they're approved for different purposes. Like metformin is approved for type 2 diabetes, but forward-thinking doctors that are looking at the scientific data are starting to prescribe it off-label. Now, companies like Elevian cannot market it. The vendors cannot market the use of a drug off-label, but a doctor can prescribe for any use they deem valuable to the patient. So that's probably what would happen with our drug. In addition, we're looking at ways of making our drug available outside of the US in jurisdictions that allow, once we've proven that it's safe in humans. So we won't give it to anybody until we've proven that to our satisfaction. And then we can allow that use in ways that's compatible, safe, compliant with FDA and other government regulatory practices. I think it's a good place to take a breath.
Thank you, Mark. That was really fascinating. It's great to learn what you're working on with your incredible team in GDF11. Moving back to you, Dr. Renna, what are you excited about integrating soon into your practice? You gave us a comprehensive overview of some of the options that you are exploring with your patients now. What are you most excited for next?
I think just in the last year, one of the tenets of science is that you can't make a claim in science unless you can measure it. If it's not measurable, then it's not provable. And one of the problems that we've had until just the past year or so is measuring how old you are. We know we can do the math from your birthday to today and determine how many years and days you've been on the planet, but we don't know, Mark volunteered that he's 50. We don't know if biologically Mark is 44 or if he's 52. And we really need to know that to be able to score our interventions and understand whether the interventions were worth the person's risk. So one of the things that I'm excited about that we've just started doing this year is we've measured biological age of various tissues through a test called DNA methylation. As it turns out, our chromosomes and the genes that they hold become inaccessible through a process in the body called methylation. Methylation is not a bad process. It is the core of detoxification. So we not only need methylation, but we need to encourage methylation. Methylation is also the process by which neurotransmitters get turned on. And without methylation, I wouldn't have been able to say any of this. So methylation is not a target for us to retard, but it is a tool for us to measure biologic age. And one of the things that we're doing now is measuring every lifespan client's biological age. And then we're going to measure it annually to see, are we making any progress in either slowing the aging process or reversing it.
That's great. And you spoke about measuring annually. One of the things that we look at as part of For Good Ventures is data technologies that are advancing healthcare. Particularly, there are a lot of technologies now that the individual can do themselves in order to track their data over time. Everything from measuring your hormone levels from home to tuning in remotely to your doctor to show them what your current blood pressure and oxygenation levels are. With all of that additional data, and then you add on things like the microbiome and what we're learning in genetics, what do you foresee as the optimal, I guess, platform for health and wellness in the future?
In terms of, sure. What I said earlier was that for a person to make substantive changes and to adjust his or her behaviors, medications, and supplements to continue those improvements, they're going to need a collaboration. And that collaboration is going to come from a knowledgeable source. From Lifespan's inception until now, it's only been as good as my brain and my energy level allows, and then the physicians that we've added. So now we have a collective brain of 4 medically trained, experienced physicians, but that's still pretty limited. I think that Mark's original product, for which he left his residency, was a really important venture. What we need is the medical mind of God. And we all need to have an individual health coach, which of course would be an avatar, that would represent us or tie us into the medical mind of God. We need daily monitoring. We've started at Lifespan, we've started using continuous blood sugar monitoring because we want to get insulin levels as low as possible without interfering with energy conversion and growth factors as high as possible. Fahey proved that reverses aging. So we want to do that whether you're taking growth hormone or not. And in order to do that, we've got to have continuous monitoring going on. I think that the future in terms of how we administer these programs and how many people we can help. Right now, Lifespan is an elite clinic. It's not egalitarian. And I think that we need to develop technologies that can impact the health and well-being of the working class as much as we do the leisure class in order to close the gap between the haves and the have-nots. I mean, that threatens everything. All of us could fall into that gap and not come out again. So my sense is that, I will probably finish my career, at least it's my ambition to finish my career as an augmented reality avatar. I'll probably look a little different than I do. I might do a touch up here or there, but bottom line is you still recognize me. And my avatar will be augmented by a connection to a program that will give me in real-time options of what this person should do or not do, and how I could advise an individual. It won't take me out of the equation. I don't think human beings prefer that. But I think that it'll make me a lot bigger and a lot better equipped.
Thank you. That's well said. I have a question for the audience. If you could email or send in your message, your Q&A, what your preference is to Simran, she'll write this down and we have about 20 minutes left for questions, and so hopefully we'll get to this. But of these 4 topics, if you could let us know from the current audience what your preference is for them to cover of the following 4. Brain health. 2 is the immune system. 3 is hormones. And 4 is external physical beauty. Of those 4 topics, Simran can tally it, and we'll get back to that at the end for one of the final questions. The other thing that we were interested in garnering from you both is biohacking is on the rise, and many of us are trying to do as much as we can to understand what's available to our health. Also, there's attention on health more than ever with COVID-19. I think there's also this risk that false information is proliferant, and we have to be careful about who we listen to. When people's lives are at stake, they become extra vulnerable. Do you think that there are any risks or red flags that we should be looking out for when we're exploring options for expanding human longevity? Is there any landmines that we need to be careful to navigate?
I'll go first. My comment is that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. If it sounds way too expensive, it's probably not real. And if it sounds way too affordable, it's probably not effective. So, we're all looking for Goldilocks's bowl, and finding just the right thing. With regard to affordability, I said that right now, anti-aging age reversal is an expensive proposition. So it's really only for the affluent. We need to do something about that. It has to become egalitarian. Your Uber driver needs to be on a similar program. But that's going to take a while, as most socioeconomic changes do. What I would say, and when I read the biohackers, some of which are very well informed and really very discerning in what they represent, is that they live or die by their sensationalism. A biohacker is only as cool as the revolutionary topic he's talking about today. I could name some of our clients who are biohackers, and I've talked to them about this personally. And it's a tough game for them. They're all vying for the champion belt. And because of that, they sometimes have to birth subjects before they're ready, prematurely. And what people take away from that is, oh, great. Like if I just get on this human growth hormone, metformin, DHEA thing, I'm going to be able to reverse my age. So if I'm 37, I'm going to be 36 next year and 35 the year after that. What about your diet? How much are you exercising versus being sedentary, and how long are you sleeping, and what do you know about your sleep? Invest $500 in a ring, and get some data about your sleep, or some other device that will give you that information. Attend to the basics. Nobody is ready to build a tower of superstructure until they've built the foundation. So it's great to do all the things that I mentioned, have cyclical applications of rapamycin, dasatinib, quercetin, take metformin, all that stuff is terrific. But I promise you it doesn't work, because I've tried it with clients who were not compliant with the foundations. What Mark said is, some of my clients are the healthiest a smoker can be, but my God, they're still smoking. Like what? Okay, that's what I said about perspective. You've got to identify your meaning and who you are. But the bottom line is, I would be careful about building a superstructure without first restoring the foundation. And I would also be careful about sensationalism.
Yeah, so just adding to that, the FDA exists for a purpose. So those of us that are developing drugs have a deep respect for what they're doing. Yes, some things could change. We could allow more people to use drugs earlier with proper informed consent that are still experimental. There's there are things that could perhaps change, but they're there to protect us. A lot of what biohackers talk about are case studies. It's really easy to find a case study of somebody who's had even a miraculous effect. So it's, the placebo effect. We need to prove in clinical trials all of our drugs are better than placebos. Because if we give a placebo to somebody, then certain significant percentage of people are going to see improvement. And the more significant that placebo is, the more improvement we see. So an injection typically has a better effect than a drug. A surgery has an incredible placebo effect. So you just got to be really, really careful about some of these things. And some of these biohacking things that we've done, if we look through history, we found to things that we thought, and maybe in the short term provide some great effect in muscle growth, for example. It turns out to significantly deteriorate other organs and increase our risk for death. So you just got to be really, really careful. I mean, there are people out there in the community that are doing some extremely dangerous things, taking gene therapies that are totally unproven, and just got to be really, really careful about that. So, I just say, go to your doctor and ask your doctor. Don't just talk to a friend and see what somebody's doing. And the other thing is really important. Just remember that some things can make you feel better in the short run and can actually be severely damaging longer term.
Thank you. I think it's really important for us to take that into consideration as well. So we're opening it up to additional Q&A. Simran, do you have a couple of questions for us, or should I just read off the Q&A?
It's up to you. I see that, I don't know if you saw in the answered ones, at the bottom, there's a question about exercise. If you want to read that out, or I can read it out. It's up to you.
Sure, go ahead. Thank you.
So since exercise is such an important factor, what's the most promising treatments to promote the mobility / movement function you are seeing now? I hope I pronounced this properly. Regina Kane is over a decade old, and stem cells are illegal in the US. So what's the next best thing?
I think I should probably take that question because I'm the original licensee of Regina Kane. Regina AG, the company who had me sit on their board for a while, is created by the founder of Regina Kane. Regina Kane is a brand name in science. The serum is called autologous conditioned serum. It's an MD, PhD orthopedist who has had a very distinguished career. Did his MD training in Germany, his PhD at University of Pittsburgh, which is known for its expertise in orthopedics, and then developed this process by which you can milk the lymphocytes or immune system cells of your blood for the anti-inflammatory factors that will shut inflammation down in an injured joint, tendon, or ligament. The most common injury of the joints is osteoarthritis. And autologous conditioned serum, whether you call it orthokine or regenokine, is just a phenomenal treatment for that. There's a principle in immunology and that covers, or that also folds into aging, that healing proceeds as inflammation recedes. So as long as the tissue that you're trying to heal is still inflamed, you're not going to get healing from that. And if anything, you can get accidents, which can result in abnormal tissue. So you've got to make the inflammation in a torn tendon, ligament, a pulled muscle, an arthritic joint, a torn meniscus, a torn labrum of the shoulder or hip. You've got to make that inflammation go away before the body will then sequence the healing process. And that's exactly what autologous conditioned serum is. It is the first step and a profound step in the healing and restoration of injured connective tissue or joints. I am astounded by the fact that there's nothing better yet. Regina Kane is actually 22 years old. Dr. Peter Whaling, who discovered or created Regina Kane, began treating patients in the late 1990s with this serum. And I was introduced to it in 2005. I became a licensee in 2010. We've treated hundreds, if not thousands, of clients with Regina Kane. And I've waited every year for the better product. If you think about it, how cool would it be and how sensational would it be if I could come forward and go back into that database of patients or clients and say, I have something better. This is better than that. Can you believe it? This is better than that. And in all this time, I have not seen anything better. I don't believe that stem cells are necessarily ready for prime time. I think they're profoundly important. But I don't see people having stem cells harvested and injected into their joints, which is legal in the United States, or going outside the United States to have umbilical cord stem cells injected into joints and coming back and saying, I'm much better. Not yet.
Thank you. And there's another one on drugs. So are there any treatments new in the US that can help protect current or future neurodegeneration like Parkinson's?
Neurodegeneration, and I'm sorry, Simran, what was the last thing you said?
Like Parkinson's disease, is there any treatment that can protect current or future degeneration?
You know, there are some off-label use of medications that can help slow the degenerative process in neurologic tissue. Parkinson's is the end product of excessive inflammation in a part of the brain called the substantia nigra. Alzheimer is the proliferation and overpopulation of misfolded proteins. There are some nutritional supplements like that cat's claw extract that I talked about. There are other supplements that have ingredients that have been shown to slow those degenerative processes in human models. And there are some sort of case studies, like Mark mentioned earlier, of the use of them in people who reported improvement. Mark and I know, and everybody probably knows, that you can't really separate the placebo effect from the actual biological effect. But I've found something recently that I think will grow into a profound therapeutic practice. It is a process that is easily misconstrued, so I want to be very specific about it. But it's a process that uses hyperthermia, or heating of the body and the brain, to elicit a response that results in the proliferation of some very important proteins that we stop producing after the aging process really takes off, which is at age 30. So we produce this family of proteins called heat shock proteins, particularly HSP70 or heat shock protein 70. Very readily, like Mark said, hey, we're a healing machine, a restorative, rejuvenative machine until 30. And after 30, we produce fewer and fewer and fewer. And often by the time we reach 50, we're not producing any of those anymore. And heat shock protein 70 is one of those proteins. I've seen remarkable reversals of neurodegeneration in using a very specific form of hyperthermia. Now, here's the caveat. If you go to a hyperthermia clinic, which I think there may be one or two in the United States, and there are many in Europe, what you're risking is neurologic damage by exposing yourself to their hyperthermia protocol. I know this because I've had desperate patients or patients with desperate diseases, fatal terminal diseases like glioblastoma of the brain or like disseminated pancreatic cancer, and it was the last ditch attempt. So they went to Europe, they had hyperthermia treatments. I've had Lyme patients who've gone to Europe and had hyperthermia treatments. And what they've come back and said was, that was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and I hope I'm better for it. The hyperthermia treatment that I'm talking about that's available in only one clinic in the United States, and it's not mine, is a brain-guided hyperthermia. And it is exquisite technology that not only keeps you from having any risk of damage, but also measures the point at which your brain gives its instruction to release those healing proteins. So I think that the development of that technology is going to be a key process in the treatment of neurodegenerative diseases.
Thank you, Dr. Renna. That was really interesting. We have one special question particular to Mark about GDF11. Are there any studies on small molecules that can regulate the GDF11 production in our body? Is there any way to increase GDF11 synthesis naturally in a human body?
Yeah, so great questions. The answer is that there are no studies published to date on any ways to regulate GDF11. This is all work that we are working on as a company, so we're quite interested. GDF11 itself, it has the advantage that it's a natural protein, but it has the disadvantage that it requires injection. It has a relatively short half-life. So we're looking at what ways can we safely and upwardly modulate GDF11 to get the same effects, either injecting far less frequently or being taken orally. So it's all work that we have. We have some very interesting progress yet to be announced there, but it's all very early. Now, the second question, are there ways to increase GDF11 synthesis? So now there are some interesting published studies here. So there's a study that showed that long-term exercisers have higher levels of GDF11. So we know that there's at least an interesting correlation there. We also, there's a study recently showing that GDF11 can mimic caloric restriction, and the opposite, caloric restriction, can increase levels of GDF11. So, it's pretty interesting as well. So caloric restriction, for those of you guys that know it, is perhaps the most proven intervention into health and longevity in many, many different model species, where if we decrease the number of calories, either total calories or through intermittent fasting, we find that it works quite well, that it has many, many different health effects, and again, turns on regenerative pathways. And it appears that GDF11 mimics caloric restriction, is kind of a caloric restriction in an injectable, if you will. So, quite interesting there.
You covered two questions at once. There was another question also that asked specifically about fasting. So thank you. Next question is, with the aspect of longevity, or what aspect of longevity is risk-free these days? Meaning without special drugs and the costs that come with it. So in addition to the basics, what are the risk-free things that we can do these days?
So I recommend that that person take one of the nicotinamide riboside products, whether it's combined with taro, still bean, or resveratrol. I think they're interchangeable. I would certainly take fisetin. Fisetin is a very inexpensive bioflavonoid, one of the senolytics. I would take quercetin. And I like this cat's claw product. The brand name is Percepta. I think it's approved, of proved benefit. So those are pretty easy. The basic nutritional supplement formula that I've always ascribed to is an omega-3 oil, because our diet is woefully absent of that oil, and plenty of omega-6 and 9. Or eating cold water fish. You can get it from your diet if you eat enough cold water fish, and then you're in the conflict where too much cold water fish, too much mercury, just take an omega-3 oil. So omega-3 oils, I think that pretty much everybody in my career has been either deficient or insufficient of vitamin D. So unless you know that your vitamin D is close to 100, you should probably take a vitamin D supplement every day. So now we've got the nicotinamide riboside product, the fisetin, the quercetin, the Percepta, and omega-3 oil. You're getting up there to where a good biochemist would say, I don't know what's going to happen after you add 3 more. So I think that would be the basic program. And
all of those, Chris, are available without prescription that you've mentioned?
They're all supplements.
I just wanted to be mindful of everyone's time. It is slightly past the hour. If you don't mind, there are a couple other questions that we can keep going. But in case anyone needs to drop off, you're more than welcome to. Do you guys both have a couple more minutes?
I do.
Oh, great. Okay, another question here is, can using the sauna be effective for promoting heat shock protein generation?
No. Saunas, as you know, heat from the outside in, and heat shock protein generation comes from the inside out. So if you are going to try and stimulate the HSPs, and maybe you have gene variations that enable you to do so, it would be through exercise. Exercise heats from the inside out. Saunas and even infrared saunas. Now, saunas and infrared saunas are both, valuable, beneficial modalities, but they have not been seen to increase HSP70, which is the target goal.
Great. Here's another question. You mentioned exercise as foundational. How do you feel about the role healing fascia plays? For me, it has had a profound effect in my ability to exercise, chronic fatigue, brain fog, inflammation, pain, etc. But it has required a significant time and monetary investment, attending two times per week and homework every day. More than all the cabinets and supplements and stem cells I've done. Are you seeing this is true at a macro level?
Yeah, so the fascia, which is a tissue that invests all structures of the body. So if we dismantle the human body and laid every piece out, of course, there would be millions of pieces. And if we wanted to hold them together, we would start with this thin, almost like saran wrap tissue, and start rolling everything into it. And that's how the body is constructed. The fascia is responsible for doing a lot of things. One of them is that it's an electrical sheet. So it can diffuse charges or concentrate charges in tissues that need more ionic activity. I'm getting in the weeds here, but the bottom line is that if you have a recurring fascial problem that requires year after year of 2-time-a-week fascial treatments, you're probably going to find that you have a nutritional deficiency. Now, you may not be able to find it easily. You may need to look at, let's say, a gene panel to look at what variations of genes you have, to recognize that even though my magnesium level looks good in my blood or in my red blood cells, I need much more magnesium because I have this gene variation. I need a different form of folic acid because I have this gene variation. So you may have to look more deeply to find the answer or the explanation for why you need so much fascial work. But it might in the long run be less expensive and less taxing to do that than it would to keep going to the treatments.
That's great. And we have the results back from the poll earlier, and it seems like brain health is the #1 topic of interest. Are there any treatments, perhaps newer in the US, that help protect current or future neurodegeneration like Parkinson's?
Yeah, I've already spoken about the, the brain thermal tunnel, the brain-guided hyperthermia. And that right now that may be filling my glass, meaning I haven't looked too far beyond that. Prior to my discovering that, and the fellow who created it, I was very interested in these liquors or substances made by stem cells called exosomes. Exosomes are a language spoken by stem cells, immune system cells, and somatic cells. If you think about the convergence of those three cells, let's say that you injured yourself, you cut your cuticle, or you bruised your thigh, what has to happen for that injury to heal is immune system cells have to show up at the site of injury. So the somatic cells that were damaged have to sound an alarm. And the immune system cells are not just knocking on doors, asking if everybody's okay. The somatic cells set off an alarm. That alarm is an exosomal alarm. The immune system cells arrive at the scene and communicate with the damaged somatic cells through the language of exosomes. The immune system also calls for stem cells. So stem cells show up on the scene. The stem cells are necessary for the immune system to oversee the healing of the damaged tissue. And it is the conversation that takes place between those three entities that results in healing. Well, that means that if we understood the hieroglyphic of exosomes, if we could understand the language, we could ask stem cells to do things. We could ask stem cells to repair your lenses so that you wouldn't have cataracts. We could ask stem cells to smooth over your joints so that you wouldn't have osteoarthritis. We might even ask stem cells to put hair on men's head, not that it would matter to me. But I would say that we could ask stem cells for a great number of beneficial processes, beginning with diseases and injuries and then extending into anti-aging. So I was interested in stem cell therapies abroad, mostly, because that's where exosomes are more widely studied. There is one FDA-approved exosome product. It does not have anti-aging effects or an application in neurodegenerative diseases, and I don't think that it will. I think there'll have to be other exosomal products approved by FDA before we get that tool.
Thank you. Mark, did you want to add anything specifically to brain health?
Yeah, well, so I think Chris is really the expert on what we can do today and prescribe for patients. I can talk about it specific to what we're working on at Elevian. It's a very important area. So one of our co-founders discovered that GDF11 improves initially the quantity of the vasculature, and we now know also the quality of the vasculature in the brain, and we now know throughout the body. So, if you want a way to improve healing and regeneration, the vasculature touches everything. So it's a great thing. This drug acts directly on endothelial progenitor cells, and basically like earlier, they're not stem, but earlier cells that line the blood vessels and promotes new cells to grow. So that's exciting. Now, what we see, we think indirectly to that effect is we see growth in new neurons in certain areas of the brain. And this is specifically in animal models. And we now know that even in humans, actually, it's still a subject of some scientific controversy, but I think most scientists believe today that in humans, there is new neuron growth, even with age in certain areas of the brain. And without question, there's new synaptic growth. So we're seeing these really important effects. That we've published, and then we found these effects in specifically in these stroke diseases. Other people have published findings in some other areas suggesting that it has an effect in Alzheimer's disease. We've done some studies with Alzheimer's disease, and we do see some effects there. It's just such a crowded space. There's been so many failures in the space. It's a tough thing to get investors to support. But so it'd be wonderful, off-target effect if we also help to prevent Alzheimer's or treat Alzheimer's. And we haven't tested things like Parkinson's, and there's so many more things that we could test that we haven't yet tested.
That's great. I really like this question here. What is the role of gut and services like Viome? This is an area that we spend a lot of time looking at as well. And there's so many different ways to measure the microbiome. Do you find any of the tests helpful, and are you integrating them into your practice, Chris?
Yes. So I find them, for the most part, I find them all helpful. There are about 5 now, of which I'm aware. And there are a couple of them that, I think need a little bit more, they need to educate me a little bit more on how they draw their conclusions. But there are, three that have been the age-old leader in that field, and then one, and then two others that are much more recent. And really, the microbiome is a model of human complexity. It's trillions of organisms that exist in this this civilization that we only recently became aware of. We knew it was there, but we didn't pay any attention to it. And only recently do we realize that the way this community is structured and where the positioning is of the members affects not only how it acts, but how the absorptive abilities that are necessary to take in nutrients are run, and how the immune system greets those nutrients. If your immune system recognizes a food that you're eating as potentially foreign, you've just done yourself a disservice. That meal is going to result in more damage than repair. The microbiome is really in charge of that. So I think the question was, do I integrate that in practice? Yes, absolutely. Do I believe that the conclusions that are drawn from the microbiome testing that we have available to us are valid? I do in 60% of the lab cases, 3 out of 5. And the other 2 might be even more valid. I just haven't been educated to the point that I can understand how they're drawing those conclusions. And then ultimately, what can you do with your microbiome today? You can eat foods that don't upset your stomach, that help energize you, don't fatigue you. You can maintain hydration. Fluid hydration is very important to the microbiome, and it changes with hydration status. You could take a probiotic, although that's kind of a shotgun therapy. But certainly if you're having any kind of difficulties, you should buy a probiotic. Try one this month and try a different one next month to see which one you might need. Your microbiome is as unique a signature as your genome is. We just don't know how to read the letters yet. But I think that's, I might want to pause here and not take up any more time. That's my thought on it.
Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. For those not that familiar with it, the microbiome are all of the organisms that line our gut. And, it's really interesting if we were to look at all the organisms that are on us that are not us, okay? We think most cells are us, right? They have all the same DNA. It's true that a lot of our cells and a lot of the volume is us, but we actually have many, many more cells that are not us. And if we were to combine them all up into a ball, they'd be about the size of a softball. So there's a lot of cells there. And so all those cells that line our gut, they can be unhealthy. And, if we feed them the wrong things, or we take antibiotics, for example, that kill off the good bacteria, that can cause problems. So, one thing that we've known for a while is if you take too much antibiotics, you can get an overgrowth of a particularly very dangerous bug called C. difficile. So that one's really well known. But I think we're beginning to learn that even imbalances of the microbiome can cause problems. So there's still, in my mind, really a whole lot to learn. I've looked at some of the tools that are out there. You send in a genetic analysis and they'll tell you recommendations. I don't know where they get that information from. It's just not clear that it's that valid. So I think that there's a lot of gimmicky stuff that's out there right now, in my opinion. But I think there's a lot to learn. There's really, the microbiome we know is important. We just don't exactly know what's needed and how to address problems.
It's evolving quickly. There's a lot of potential, nonetheless.
No doubt.
And we have one last question here. What about NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide?
Sure. That's related to the boosting NAD. NAD is an auxiliary energy compound that's burned inside the energy producing portion of the cell called mitochondria. So within the mitochondria, you can burn oxygen and sugars, carbohydrates, and that's our aerobic energy supply, or you can burn NAD, which is our anaerobic supply. When we run out of oxygen, like when we're sprinting or running a marathon, when we run out of oxygen, we switch from the carbohydrate oxygen system over to the NAD system. What we said earlier in the very introduction to this talk is that if you can increase the energy inside cells, they will perform better. And better might mean slowing the degenerative process, or it might mean reversing some of the damage already done. So one of the ways to increase cellular energy is to boost NAD. And the two compounds that boost NAD are nicotinamide riboside and nicotinamide mononucleotide, the NMN version of that. And there are, nutritional supplements that contain both. Published author and world acknowledged expert David Sinclair is more of an NMN guy. Lenny, Italian guy. Yeah, Lenny Guarenti from MIT is more the nicotinamide riboside guy. They both have horses that could win the race, meaning any way that you can boost your NAD, whether it's through NAD IV, NAD patches, NAD intramuscular injections, nicotinamide riboside, or nicotinamide mononucleotide, you're going to be better off for it.
Thank you both so much. Dr. Chris Renna and Dr. Mark Allen, you are both truly impressive, and the knowledge that you shared with us today we're grateful to have it. Thank you very much for your time.
Echoing everything that Kim said, it was amazing having you here. It was such an interesting, informative conversation that we had. And Kim, thank you again for helping put this together. And we will be putting another one soon in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned to our newsletters, and you'll find out what that conversation will be on. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. And and have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.